My name is Elijah, and this is the story of how I became a prophet of God in a tumultuous time in the kingdom of Israel. I grew up in Tishbe, a small town in Gilead east of the Jordan River. My family was simple and hard-working, and I, like the rest of my community, lived a humble life. As a child, I listened to the stories of the patriarchs and prophets who preceded us. I was always fascinated by the power of God and His ability to intervene in the lives of His people. However, I never imagined that one day I would be called to play such an important role. Sometimes, we also feel like the world is becoming a difficult place and our faith is put to the test. If Elijah's courage inspires you to stand firm, I invite you to subscribe and turn on the bell. Let's walk together through this story of power. The kingdom of Israel was going through difficult times. Ahab the king and his wife Jezebel, a cunning and manipulative woman, had abandoned the God of our fathers and had given themselves over to idolatry, worshipping Baal, the god of storm and fertility. This deeply troubled me because I knew that our God Yahweh is jealous and would not tolerate the worship of other gods. The people were divided and morale was low, as many turned away from the teachings of Moses and followed false gods. It was during this time that I began to feel an uneasiness in my heart. I dedicated myself to agriculture and herding, but I felt that there was something greater to which I was destined. I prayed constantly and sought God's guidance. It wasn't until one particular day when I was alone in the field that I clearly heard God's call. He spoke to me with a clear and powerful voice, telling me to prepare myself, for He had a mission for me. At first, I did not fully understand what this call meant. However, I knew that I could not ignore it. I began to prepare myself spiritually, dedicating more time to prayer and the study of the Scriptures. Conviction grew in my heart and I realized that God was calling me to be His prophet. It was a moment of deep change in my life, and I knew that my destiny would be to face the idolatry plaguing the kingdom. The first challenge was to present myself before King Ahab. I knew it would not be easy, as Ahab was not a man who accepted criticism, especially from someone who came from such a humble place as me. However, with God's backing I felt brave. I headed to the palace with the certainty that the message I carried was vital for the future of Israel. Before entering the palace, I took a moment to reflect on my journey. I remembered the stories of Moses, Joshua, and other prophets who had faced much greater challenges. That gave me courage. I felt that I was following in the footsteps of giants and, although the task seemed intimidating, I trusted that God would guide me. When I entered the palace, I felt the distrustful gaze of the courtiers and the cold glint in Ahab's eyes. However, I spoke firmly and without hesitation. I told him that God was unhappy with his idolatry and that He would send a drought as a sign of His displeasure. Ahab's reaction was one of fury, but I remained calm, knowing I was fulfilling my calling. After presenting myself before King Ahab and announcing God's judgment, I faced an atmosphere charged with hostility. The king, accustomed to everyone around him paying him homage, was not prepared to receive such a forceful divine warning, especially from someone like me, a humble prophet from Tishbe. However, the hand of God was clearly upon me and filled me with courage to convey His message. The announcement of the drought was not an isolated event, but a direct consequence of the corruption and idolatry that had taken hold of the kingdom of Israel. The kings and high officials worshipped Baal, dishonoring the covenant that God had established with His people. The drought was a reminder that true power over nature and life belonged to Yahweh and not to idols made by human hands. After my confrontation with Ahab, God commanded me to hide in the Koroth ravine, east of the Jordan. It was a time of solitude and reflection, but also of trials and miracles. The brook provided fresh water, and every day the ravens brought me bread and meat, fulfilling God's promise to take care of me. This first miracle taught me to trust in God's provision even in the midst of adversity. During my time in Koroth, the drought began to seriously affect Israel. The fields withered, the animals died, and famine spread throughout the kingdom. Meanwhile, the brook where I took refuge began to dry up. It was then that God spoke to me again and ordered me to go to Zarephath, a small town in the territory of Sidon. There, he told me, he had prepared a widow who would provide me with sustenance. When I arrived at Zarephath, I found the widow collecting firewood. I approached her and asked for some water and bread. The woman, with sadness in her eyes, explained to me that she only had a handful of flour and a little oil, enough for one last meal for herself and her son before dying of hunger. I told her that God had promised that if she trusted and gave to me first, her provision would not run out until the drought ended. The widow, despite her desperate situation, showed admirable faith and followed my instructions. Thus God performed another miracle. Throughout the drought, her flour and her oil did not run out, and we had enough to feed ourselves. While I was staying with the widow, her son became seriously ill and died. The heartbroken woman asked me if I had come to her house only to remind her of her sins and take away her son. I felt her pain deeply and turned to God with fervor. I took the child and took him to my room, where I prayed to God, begging him to return the child's life. God heard my cry and the child came back to life. When I returned him to his mother, she expressed her renewed faith in the God of Israel and recognized that I was truly a man of God. Through this act, God demonstrated once again His power and His mercy, showing us that He not only provides for our physical needs but also cares for our souls and our emotions. The miracles of provision I experienced during my time with the widow of Zarephath were crucial moments in my life as a prophet. These events demonstrated that even in times of drought and scarcity, God can provide in surprising and unexpected ways. I learned that faith and obedience are fundamental to experiencing God's provision and that He can use our most difficult situations to show His love and power. My confrontation with the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel was one of the most dramatic and significant moments of my life as a prophet. The nation of Israel was in crisis, trapped between the worship of Baal and devotion to Yahweh. The goal was clear: to demonstrate to the people that the Lord was the only true God. The drought I had announced continued its course, and hunger and despair spread throughout the land. Mount Carmel would be the stage for a test that would reveal the supreme power of God. I approached King Ahab and proposed a challenge: to gather all the people of Israel on Mount Carmel along with the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah to decide once and for all who was the true God. Ahab, possibly motivated by the opportunity to get rid of me, accepted. The preparation for this monumental event was intense. When the day arrived, Mount Carmel was full of people. There was a palpable tension in the air as the two groups, the followers of Baal and the faithful of Yahweh, gathered. I addressed the crowd and posed a crucial question: how long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow Him, but if Baal, follow him. The people remained silent, and their indecision was evident. I then proposed the challenge: both I and the prophets of Baal would prepare a sacrifice, and the God who answered with fire would be the true God. The prophets of Baal were the first to try. They prepared their altar and sacrificed an ox, then began to invoke Baal from morning until noon, shouting and dancing around the altar, but there was no answer. As they persisted, I mocked them, suggesting that their god was busy or sleeping. This led them to intensify their efforts, cutting themselves and crying out with greater fervor, but it was all in vain. The sky remained silent. When my turn came, I rebuilt the altar of the Lord which had been destroyed and placed 12 stones, one for each tribe of Israel. Then I prepared the sacrifice and asked for water to be poured over it, not once but 3 times, until the entire altar was soaked and a trench around it was filled. I knelt and prayed to God, asking Him to demonstrate His power so that the people would know He is the true God. In response to my prayer, the fire of the Lord descended and consumed the sacrifice, the stones, the water, and even the dust. The people, witnessing this miracle, fell on their knees and exclaimed, "The Lord is God, the Lord is God." God's triumph was complete and clear. The prophets of Baal were defeated, and I ordered them to be captured and executed at the Kishon brook, putting an end to their corrupt influence over Israel. This challenge not only demonstrated God's power but also revitalized the faith of the people. The drought, which had been a consequence of sin and idolatry, was about to end. After the sacrifice, I went up to the top of Mount Carmel and prostrated myself in prayer. While praying, I sent my servant to look toward the sea, and on the 7th time, he saw a small cloud the size of a man's hand. I knew it was the sign I was waiting for, and I told Ahab to prepare because rain was on the way. Soon the sky darkened, and a great storm brought the long-awaited rain to the land. The challenge on Mount Carmel was a crucial moment not only for my life but also for the nation of Israel. It demonstrated that God is sovereign and that even in times of doubt and confusion, His power prevails. For me, it was a reminder that God is always present, ready to demonstrate His strength and His love to those who faithfully follow Him. After the victory on Mount Carmel, I felt a mixture of euphoria and exhaustion. We had demonstrated to the people of Israel that Yahweh was the only true God and that Baal was a false god. The nation, which was previously divided, seemed to have experienced a spiritual rebirth. However, my joy was quickly darkened by the threat of Jezebel, the wicked queen. Enraged by the execution of the prophets of Baal, Jezebel promised to kill me within 24 hours. Although I had trusted in God's protection throughout my mission, fear took hold of me, and I fled for my life, not stopping until I reached the south of Judah in the desert, where I stopped under a broom tree. I was exhausted and discouraged, and I prayed for God to take my life. I felt alone and abandoned, doubting my ability to continue with my mission. While I slept, an angel touched me and told me to eat and drink. By my side was bread baked over coals and a jar of water. After eating and drinking, I went back to sleep. The angel returned a second time and gave me more food, telling me the journey would be long. With the strength of that food, I traveled for 40 days and 40 nights to Mount Horeb, the Mount of God, and hid in a cave, still dejected and full of doubt. God asked me what I was doing there. I explained my anguish to Him, saying that the Israelites had broken their covenant, torn down their altars, and killed their prophets. I felt like the last of the prophets, and my life was in danger. God told me to go out and stand in His presence because He was going to pass by there. First, there was a strong wind that shattered mountains and rocks, but God was not in the wind. Then there was an earthquake, but God was not in the earthquake. After that, there was a fire, but God was not in the fire. Finally, a gentle whisper came, and there, In that silence, I found God. He asked me again what I was doing there, and I repeated my lament. God, in His mercy, gave me a new mission and assured me that I was not alone. He told me to anoint Elisha as a prophet in my place. Furthermore, He assured me that He had reserved 7,000 in Israel who had not bowed their knees to Baal. My encounter with God at Mount Horeb was a turning point in my life. It taught me that God does not always manifest in large and powerful acts, but is often found in quiet and silent moments. It reminded me that although I felt alone, there were others who shared my faith and that God was always with me. The new mission God gave me revitalized me and filled me with purpose. I returned with renewed determination, knowing that my work was not yet finished. I found Elisha and called him to follow me. Seeing his willingness and devotion, I knew God had chosen well. My flight and encounter with God taught me valuable lessons. I learned that even the most faithful can experience moments of doubt and discouragement, but God is always there to provide us with comfort and direction. I realized that my mission was not only to face the enemies of God but also to prepare the way for those who would come after me. As the end of my life approached, my mind was filled with memories of the works and miracles that God had performed through me. I knew that my time on earth was coming to an end, but I felt an inner peace as I contemplated the legacy I would leave behind and the destiny that awaited me. I had seen the power of God in action and had witnessed His faithfulness, and now it was time to pass the torch to the next generation. One of my final tasks was to prepare Elisha, my successor. I had found him plowing with 12 yokes of oxen and had called him to follow me. Elisha had left everything to follow God's call and had served me faithfully. I knew Elisha was destined for great things and that his devotion and courage would allow him to continue the work I had begun. The time I spent with him was valuable, as it allowed me to pass on the wisdom and lessons I had learned throughout my life as a prophet. As I advanced toward the end of my mission, God revealed to me that my time was coming to an end and that I would soon be taken to heaven. This did not fill me with fear, but with hope and anticipation. I shared this news with Elisha, who accompanied me during my final days. Together we traveled through several cities, and every time I tried to dissuade him, Elisha insisted on staying by my side. His loyalty and love were evident, and I felt honored to have such a dedicated disciple. Finally, we reached the Jordan River. With the power of God, I struck the water with my mantle and the river divided, allowing us to cross on dry ground. After crossing, Elisha asked me to give him a double portion of my spirit, a wish that demonstrated his devotion and desire to continue my work. I told him that if he saw me when I was taken away, his wish would be fulfilled. As we walked and talked, suddenly a chariot of fire pulled by horses of fire appeared. This chariot separated Elisha and me, and I was taken to heaven in a whirlwind. The chariot of fire was an impressive demonstration of God's power and glory. As I ascended, I saw Elisha look up, shouting, my Father, the chariot of Israel and its horsemen." I felt honored that Elisha considered me as a father, and his reaction showed the love and admiration he felt for me. My departure was spectacular, but it was also a powerful message. It demonstrated that God was with me and that He was the true King of Israel. I left my mantle, a symbol of my ministry, and Elisha was prepared to continue the work God had begun through me. When he returned to the Jordan River, he struck the water with my mantle and exclaimed, "Where is the Lord, the God of Elijah?" The river divided again, proving that the Spirit of God was now with him. My departure was a reminder that God's calling is greater than any person. God had used me to confront false kings and prophets, but his work would continue with Elisha. My legacy was not just a series of miracles, but a demonstration of God's power and sovereignty. Elisha, with his double portion of my spirit, was prepared to continue the work that God had started through me. My experience in the chariot of fire was unique, but it was also a sign of God's faithfulness. He had called me to be his prophet, and although I faced many challenges, he was always with me. My departure was a declaration of his power and love, reminding me that although our time on earth is temporary, our final destination is with God. My legacy was one of faith and courage, and I hope it inspires others to trust in God and follow his call, no matter how difficult the circumstances.